I think there is also like a potential intermediate zone where you have to worry not just about what these kind of AIs might do on their own accord, but what humans might use using these increasingly powerful AI tools to try to design them in such a way that they won't, say, help a user create, biological weapons or massive, hacking tools and stuff like that.
Welcome to another episode of Counterculture, the show that stands at the intersection of reason and faith in the battle against sentimentality. All the talk of a temporary pause in the development of artificial intelligence is gone, and the race is on. Just recently, in an illustration of life imitating art and then some, OpenAI introduced its ChatGPT 4.0 version, which bore a striking similarity in both functionality and even tonality to the movie Her from a decade ago, in which Joaquin Phoenix dates his AI virtual assistant. Take a look at that.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey there, it's going great. How about you? I see you're rocking an OpenAI hoodie. Nice choice. What's up with that ceiling about? Are you in a cool industry-style office or something?
Well, can you take a guess at what I might be doing based on what I'm showing you here?
From what I can see, it looks like you're in some kind of recording or production setup. With those lights, tripods, and possibly a mic, it seems like you might be gearing up to shoot a video or maybe even a live stream.
Yeah. In fact, we've got a new announcement to make.
That's exciting. Announcements are always a big deal. Judging by the setup, it looks like it's going to be quite the professional production. Is this announcement related to OpenAI, perhaps?
It is.
I'm intrigued.
And in fact, what if I were to say that you're related to the announcement, or that you are the announcement?
Me? The announcement is about me? Well, color me intrigued. Are you about to reveal something about AI? Or more specifically about me as a part of OpenAI? You've got me on the edge of I don't really have a seat, but you get the idea. What's the big news?
Yeah, we've got a new model that can interact with the world through audio, vision, and text.
We are way past HAL 9000 now, aren't we? Could that flirty PA really be an AI honeypot that ushers in the end of mankind, as some have predicted? What will the next generation of Siris mean for our ability to distinguish the virtual from the human? What of the concerns being raised about discerning the truth from misinformation, or even original art from that which is AI generated? Will the robots wipe us out or escort us into a Xanadu of unbridled leisure? Or is there a third way? Are we looking at much more limited impacts to our way of life, for good or bad, at least in the foreseeable future of AI development? To help us wrap our minds around these mind-bending developments, we're pleased to be joined by philosopher Nick Bostrom, who Wired magazine recently described as the man who first popularized the idea that superintelligent AI would erase us all in his 2014 book, Superintelligence. And now in his new book, Deep Utopia, Bostrom conceives of a world in which that same superintelligent AI solves all of man's problems. Bostrom is the founding director of the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford University and the principal researcher for the Macrostrategy Research Initiative. And again, his new book is entitled Deep Utopia, Life and Meaning in a Solved World. Nick Bostrom, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
So, what is your take? This is especially for the layman, since I am one, trying to understand how things are developing and sort of the conversations we should be having. What are the competing goods we should be talking about in terms of balancing tests and even potential regulation? We'll get to that. But can you give us your perspective on where IA development is now and what are some of the things you're thinking about?
Well, AI development is fast at the moment. It looks like it's on the path towards achieving some form of artificial general intelligence that can do a very wide range of tasks. I think eventually all the tasks that the human brain is capable of. And once we reach that point, I think it will not be long until we have superhuman forms of artificial intelligence. Machine intelligence is that surpass the human brain, not just in narrow fields, but also in scientific and technological creativity, strategic thinking, general wisdom. So this is a technology like no other. It's not just another cool gadget, but I think it will mean a fundamental transformation of human civilization and Earth originating intelligent life.
When we get past general intelligence, the kind of ability to do everything that the human mind can conceive of that you're describing, when you talk about transforming human civilization, does that mean transforming the nature of the human being as well?
Potentially, if superintelligence is developed, and let's assume for the sake of the argument, safely developed and controlled, then I think it would unlock an immense toolbox of technological capabilities. Because if you think about what it would mean if research in science and technology were not limited by the cleverness of human scientists, but were performed by these machine minds at digital speeds, we would, I think, rapidly have massive progress in biotechnology, in medicine, energy technology across the board. And amongst those technologies that would then be realized, I think, would also be technologies that would allow us, if we wanted to modify our own human biological organism. So I think like kind of super advanced biotechnologies and medical technologies or other ways of kind of interfacing between digital and biological.
And so I mean, just thinking about that, right? So you mentioned medical advances when you get to that stage. Well, first of all, how far do you think that stage is off in the offing right now?
Well, I think it's hard to be precise about timelines. I mean, we've never had a transition to a machine intelligence era previously, so we have very little to go on. I do think that timelines have contracted somewhat over the last 10 years with this deep learning revolution and more recently these transformer architectures that you see instantiated in large language models that are now becoming multimodal. I don't think we can rule out timescales of just like a few years, but it's also possible it could take significantly longer.
We're going to have to come up with like a corollary to Moore's law with respect to artificial intelligence, right? Understanding how fast things develop in terms of computing power.
Yeah, and in fact, they are related. Like one of the main drivers of the progress we've seen in AI in recent years has been a consequence of larger and larger amounts of computation being applied to train and run these systems. And that's partly because of progress in semiconductor technology, but also just the amount of investment going into this field, larger and larger data centers, more and more money being spent on training runs. I think the next generation of language model might cost on the order of several hundred million or $1 billion to train, and then more to run. And so as you scale up the amount of compute applied to these, the performance seems to improve correspondingly.
So, I mean, I know with respect to the language models, when we talk about regulation or concerns, it largely revolves around misinformation, being able to, as I said at the outset, being able to distinguish what's true from what isn't true, what's real from what's virtual. And this is where you've had some legislation at the state level in places like Colorado and California being kicked around. You also have now at the federal government level in the United States, the leadership, well, at least Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer talking about if China is spending $50 billion on developing AI, then if we're not essentially providing sort of the same level of subsidy, then we're losing ground to the Chinese. So it seems to me that there's less discussion about, you know, sort of the robot takeover when it comes to where we are now with AI. And it's more when we get to the stage that you were talking about with the sort of the superintelligence stage, where there's lots of upside, but then potentially lots of downsides too. And we have to have sort of the conversation about competing goods. As I mentioned, is that a fair summary of things?
I think so, yeah. So there's like a whole bunch of different issues and challenges that we will need to confront. Some are more near term and some are more long term, and we need to deal with both. My own work has focused mostly on what used to be the long term, like these more kind of profoundly transformative possible forms of artificial intelligence. Now maybe they are no longer so long term, but still as transformative. But I think there is also like a potential intermediate zone where you have to worry not just about what these kind of AIs might do on their own accord, but what humans might use using these increasingly powerful AI tools. So there has been a push, for example, in getting red teaming and pre-deployment testing of models. This was done to some extent with ChatGPT 4, but I think the next generation it will be even more important to try to design them in such a way that they won't, say, help a user create, biological weapons or massive, hacking tools and stuff like that. And then to the degree that these become relied upon by many people for as sources of information, there's like also obviously important questions about other ideological biases baked into these. How can we, train these AI systems so that they're as kind of honest and reliable as possible. And that's partly a technical question, but it's also partly a political question, an organizational question.
So thinking about where you focused your work on that transformational stage, and you just gave sort of a good example of the good and the bad. So the good is the biomedical research. Maybe we're going to find cures for diseases we thought we'd never find in the very near term, sort of unexpectedly, cures for cancer and other diseases that afflict mankind. But then the flip side is using that sort of supernatural intelligence, superintelligence to create weapons of mass destruction, as you said. So give us sort of that phase, what you're thinking about in terms of, is there preemptive regulatory constraints that make sense, or should we allow this competition that's ongoing between Google and Microsoft and OpenAI, all the competitors in the space? Should we allow that to proceed and continue these debates as we see the development occur? Should we preordain some of these pitfalls that we anticipate we're going to have to confront, or should we see how things develop at this stage?
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I think as the capability levels increase, there will need to be increasing levels of involvement and oversight from government and the rest of society, and possibly at some point some degree of coordination between the leading AI labs. I think completely freewheeling competition is great when you have a relatively primitive technology and the difficulty is to get it to do anything useful and interesting at all. Then this drives progress. As you get into these potentially more transformative forms of AI, I think the safety aspect starts to loom larger, and ultimately it might be too big to be the sole province of any one lab or any one company, and really becomes a matter for all of society, indeed for all of humanity, ultimately. So I think the conversation and the kind of involvement of other actors will have to sort of ratchet up over time.
So how has your thinking evolved over the decade between the two books I mentioned at the outset, the Superintelligence versus Deep Utopia? What you thought AI might mean for humanity a decade ago, and what you're thinking about it today.
Yeah, so it's not really the case that I've had some sort of 180 change of my views. I've all along thought there were two sides to this coin, like the side where you can look at the various ways that things could go wrong and the risks, and then the other side where like things could go right and it could really help us. I think those are both there. I still believe that. It's just the earlier book focused on the kind of pitfalls, so in the hope that if we could understand them better, we would have a greater chance of avoiding them. And now I thought it was time also to have a look at the other side of the coin, like what happens if things go, as it were, maximally well. And it turns out there are kind of interesting challenges in that scenario also. Like if you really take seriously this possibility of achieving a future where all our kind of practical problems are solved, where we have this almost magical technology, economic abundance, you face, as it were, more philosophical challenges, like what would you do all day long? What would give purpose and meaning to human lives in this world where we are kind of surpassed by robots and AIs. I'm ultimately optimistic about that, but I do think it will require a fairly profound rethink of the sort of foundation of our lives. We too many of us kind of base our identity and sense of self-worth on this idea of being a breadwinner or being able to contribute something useful to society, having certain skills that we are proud of and achievements. And if one day we end up in a situation where like AIs are just much better at us in all those different respects, we have to kind of reconsider what we base our self-worth on, not as a kind of economic productive being, but like as maybe a person who is able to enjoy this great abundance, who is able to live well, even when our own contributions are no longer needed.
Right. I mean, is a concern that that sort of everything goes well, and I have the creature comforts, I have the basics, and then I even have the creature comforts, and I have all this leisure time, and it ushers in a sort of nihilism among whatever humanity looks like at that time.
Yeah, so a wide range of different possible lifestyles would be feasible in this condition of economic abundance and like with super technology and super medicine. And you might think, well, if all you care about is, if you're like a hedonist, you just want sheer pleasure and enjoyment, you could certainly ratchet that up to extreme degrees. You could imagine completely side effect-free drugs or like direct brain manipulation that would just like be able to change your pleasure centers. But you would be in a sense a glorified junkie. But you might think there, maybe you want obviously to enjoy life and to have pleasure and happiness, but you could have other things on top of that. And I think there is a large scope for that, but it will require a rethink, because a lot of the activities that we currently fill our lives with, even like the days when we don't have to work, if you're on holiday or you're in retirement, there's a bunch of stuff we do that would no longer make sense in this condition where machines could do everything better than us. So I think it will be an opportunity to really like fundamentally rethink what it should mean to be human. We could kind of look at young children here maybe as a model, because like kids, they don't contribute economically to the world, right? They don't work for a living. But they nevertheless often seem to have great lives. I mean, they have a lot of fun. They spend their time, playing, inventing games, fantasizing about different things, interacting with other kids. Like maybe we would all have reason to become a little bit more like children in that respect. Like if we didn't have to work, if we didn't have to be serious, if we didn't have a lot of duties that we needed to discharge all the time, we could maybe focus more on, developing the art of conversation, appreciation for literature and art and beauty and music, be engaged in nature, in spiritual practices and so on.
What about that? With the concern that the appreciation for the arts, theater, plays, and poems and paintings and so forth, but AI will be able to replicate the greatest artists who have lived to this time, and you won't be able to distinguish original work product from something that was AI generated.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have essentially an end to the arts in a sense?
I think like if somebody becomes like a painter or a poet today, it's presumably not because you think the world has a shortage of poems and paintings. I mean, there's like a ton of paintings already, like more than you could look at in an entire lifetime. Right? So I think our engagement with these is more like a practice. It's like helps us maybe deepen our own appreciation of art and poetry if we write it and it kind of expresses ourselves. So even if there were AIs that could make a whole bunch of extra paintings and poems, I think the real rate limiting factor there is not the amount of art there is out there. It's more in our ability to appreciate and enjoy it.
Yeah, I spoke with Neil Chilson from the Abundance Institute about this too, and he said something that's sort of interesting. A good way to think about it too, potentially, is to say, a lot of what AI can do is clear away a lot of the mediocrity and the mundane and the brush, and force people that pursue poetry or painting or playwriting, force them to be better. Because right.
Yeah, well, in the short term, perhaps, yeah, I think like there is a limit to what current AI systems can do in terms of, say, really truly profound art. It's often a little bit sort of mid-brow or a little glib or derivative currently, but I think that's a temporary limitation. Ultimately, I think AI systems will be able to do better art and literature that's deeper and more beautiful and more original than anything that humans can do, and we'll have to come to terms with that.
That's interesting. Well, so I mean, just on the super intelligence phase again, because this is sort of the blue sky. You know, some of the futurists out there, I mean, they talk about and have been talking about this period as, in part, as sort of like the pursuit of immortality. Is that part of what we're discussing here? Is the idea that you know, I mean, there's a company, I think it's called BrainBridge, that's talking about head transplants right now. You know, the proverbial you take Peter Thiel's brain and put it on a titanium body. I mean, is that some of the stuff we're talking about too?
I don't think that's like what's driving people in the field of AI. Mostly, I think it's other things. Now, it is true, though, I guess, as a side effect of really radical advances in medicine, is that we probably would live longer, potentially a lot longer. I think that would eventually happen without AI as well, like as we figure out how to cure more diseases and then maybe eventually do something about the aging process itself, like the kind of damage that builds up inside our cells. And it would just take us a lot longer to get there if we were sort of had to rely exclusively on human scientists. You know, doing things manually with test tubes and trying to figure stuff out. So it might happen like too late for us if human scientists had to do all of this work. Maybe we'll get like an extra 5 or 10 years just from medical research that we would be able to do. But with the AI transition, there is like a chance that even a bunch of currently alive people would still be alive at the time when some of these fundamental biological problems can be solved. And we would then have not literal immortality. I think that's still a separate category. For me, there's a big difference between living a lot longer on the one hand, and on the other hand, never dying, which would be immortality. Like, because if you think about it, say, from the point of view of God or eternity, like whether you live 80 years or like 8,000 years, it's still kind of a blink in the eye of eternity. It's still an infinitesimally small lifespan compared to literal immortality. So I think I'd still kind of want to keep that separation between longevity, even extreme longevity on the one hand, and literal immortality, which might just be physically impossible in this universe as material beings.
I want to go back to where things are right now, because I found this interview by Steve Wolfram in Reason Magazine recently kind of interesting. He said in this interview, AI is currently conceived typically means neural networks that have been trained from data about what humans do. Then the idea is to take those training examples and extrapolate them from those in a way that is similar to the way humans would extrapolate. And we've learned a lot about large language models, he says in this interview. They're easier to predict than we thought. So he says the point is to realize the technology itself has nothing. What we're doing with AI is a kind of amplified version of what we humans have. That's sort of his review of how AI is conceived of right now. I think I'm doing a fair job summarizing it, and what we're doing. Is that your belief as well in terms of sort of the snapshot, the stop, look, and listen of where we're at right now?
Yeah, I think though we should be careful not to over-index on what AI is right now. AI, what it is right now, is quite different from what AI was just 5 years ago. And I think AI 5 years in the future will also be very different from what AI is now. I think if we're thinking about creativity, it's not an all or nothing thing. It's really a matter of degree. And we already see glimpses, limited ways, in which even current AI systems or ones from recent years have been able to do creative work in limited domains. So we had, for example, DeepMind a few years ago had this a Go playing AI system that beat the human world champion in the game of Go. And some of the moves it came up with astounded human expert Go players. They thought it looked originally just like wrong, the way it placed a certain stone on the board. And then later in the game, it turned out actually that was like what unlocked the whole path to victory for the AI, like a very profoundly creative Go move. So if you're a Go expert, you could kind of realize that actually was creative. No human would have played that move. It was like a new way of thinking about Go. So that's a limited domain, but I think we will see kind of expanded areas where AIs will be able to manifest forms of creativity. And then as the AI systems become more capable, eventually have the full range of creativity that human minds sometimes achieve.
In this period we're at right now, and I know it's changing rapidly, but what are other concerns that you have? You mentioned the concerns about the superintelligence phase. We talked about a couple of those. But one of the concerns I have, and I was just reminded of it with the announcement that Klaus Schwab is stepping down as chairman of the World Economic Forum, because he did this interview at a WEF event with Sergey Brin, where he talked about AI development, and Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google, and him were talking about the end of elections. We won't need elections anymore because AI will be able to predict what the outcome is going to be, so we won't actually have to go through the messiness of elections. Well, I'm not conceding the point, but if that were something that were to be argued, that seems like something, or even proposed in a more formal setting than the WEF, that seems like something we should be discussing now, the idea that you cut people out of the small d democratic process because AI will tell you who's going to win or how the election will play out. I mean, but so a lot of focus on misinformation and maybe competition, and you trust people to discern what they understand to be true versus what they don't, just like we did in the old days of just human intelligence. But big, profound transformations about how free societies are ordered, like was suggested by Schwab, that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would suggest keeping the elections anyway, even if like just as a check at least to make sure that. But there is like a wider set of ways in which these AI technologies could, I mean, in some ways enhance, but in other ways also threaten and undermine our ability collectively to deliberate on things and form decisions. You could imagine these AI systems being used as kind of automated, customized propaganda tools. So that right now, you can try to do propaganda, but you can kind of only have one message for, you don't have time to assign a whole team of human experts to tailor-made a message for every individual voter. So you have to kind of deal in generalities. But with these AI systems, they could learn a lot about each person and then kind of craft what are the particular words that kind of check your boxes and get your consent to something. If only one side has access to these AI tools, they might have a kind of unfair advantage in being able to drive that, whether it's a political message or like some kind of commercial marketing message. And it might become important to ensure that there are sort of AI systems that are on the side of the individual voter, the individual user, who can serve as a kind of intermediate marry. If you're going to interact with the internet in the future, maybe it will be too dangerous to do it just as it were naked without protection. Like there might be these super persuaders who just persuade you of whatever, and you need your own little AI to sit in between to kind of interpret what you see or filter it or give you context or something. And that AI then, it would be really important that be aligned to you. And it's really like acting on your behalf as opposed to acting on the behalf of some company that is trying to sell you something or some sort of orthodoxy or like political view that everybody is supposed to be indoctrinated with. And architecting that, I think, will become like, a very important but also a very difficult challenge.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, just on that score, I'm sure you've seen online all the examples where people are playing with AI and they get one response back for a particular candidate versus another response for a particular candidate at the same issue, and they feel that it's biased, and arguably it is. And so the question becomes: is this an area where you want national governments to intervene now, or from what you're seeing with AI development and all the competition, is it better for some of the tools, the architecture you're talking about, give it some room to breathe and let the competition, let the competitive environment produce essentially market responses to those criticisms or concerns?
I think insofar as we are concerned with these sort of more ideological threats, or like that would be a particular views that would be promoted and others kind of de-emphasized. Yeah, I think insofar as we are concerned with that, I think government involvement might easily do more harm than good. That having a diversity of different systems built, some by one company, some by another company, some maybe by some non-profit group, and maybe the government could have one system and some other governments abroad could have different. Just having a plurality of different AI systems, I think, would probably be the best way to reduce the risk of them all kind of just being mouthpieces for like some particular ideology. Insofar as we are concerned with some of these other risks, like that they would help users design weapons of mass destruction or something, like there I could see a bigger role for having some government oversight to kind of make sure that they don't enable that kind of stuff. So there's like a bunch of different challenges, and to some extent they're kind of pushing us in different directions, and which is part of what makes this really complicated.
Nick Bostrom, he's a philosopher. He's also the author of the new book, Deep Utopia. Nick, thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Counterculture. Really appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And please leave a comment in the comments section. We'd love to hear your thoughts.